Dear comrades, a number of organizations have invited me to speak at functions organized by them in connection with the forthcoming 100th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution. I am very grateful to all the comrades who have invited me. This is a great honor they bestow, not just on me, but on my party, the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists. As I am unable to attend your functions personally, and we are all busy organizing a function similar to the ones you're organizing, I am sending you here a little videotaped message, which, if you feel like, you can play to the meeting that you're holding. The Great October Socialist Revolution is the most important date in the calendar of the history of the working class movement. It is the most momentous event, the like of which has never happened before and has never happened since. The Great October Socialist Revolution opened the road for the emancipation of the proletariat and the liberation of the oppressed peoples of the world. It's a revolution which is very different from all previous revolutions, including the great bourgeois revolutions, in that it's a revolution that put an end to all exploitation of one human being by another, whereas all previous revolutions had got rid of one form of oppression and exploitation and substituted by another one. This was the first revolution in history which destroyed exploitation forever. And what is more, its practice over a period of several decades showed that the working class not only can destroy the old rotten system, but also build a beautiful future for itself. The Soviet Union, having come into existence in the most difficult of conditions, had remarkable achievements to its credit. The first and foremost achievement was that it defeated the interventionist forces of 14 imperialist countries and their satellites. And it was a very, very difficult, complicated fight, and it required the genius of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin to guide the party and the working class and the masses of the Russian people through to success. Having defeated the intervention, the Soviet Union got on with the task which was most dear to it, namely the construction of socialism and a new life for the people. They hadn't fought, the Soviet people hadn't fought just to destroy the bourgeoisie, but to build a wonderful future for themselves. And that is the task to which the Bolshevik Party attended. And over a period of less than 2 decades, it made this country a wonderful country, pulled the Soviet people out of the entanglement of feudalism and feudal relations into the modern worlds and the highway of industrialism and higher culture, higher achievements in science, higher achievements in every single possible field. The Soviet Union had to construct socialism in the most difficult circumstances and at a very high tempo. There were comrades in the party and there were other people who were asking for the tempo to be slowed down. And Joseph Stalin, in his speech addressing comrades in 1933, said, "Comrades, we are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced capitalist countries. We make up this difference in 10 years or they'll crush us." And these words proved prophetic, because literally to the day, 10 years after that speech, the Hitlerite barbarians invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. Had the Soviet Union not constructed socialism, its industry and its agriculture, the Soviet Union would have been no match for the invading hordes of German imperialism. Everybody expected the Soviet Union to last no more than 6 weeks after the Germans had invaded the Soviet Union. 6 weeks became 6 months. 6 months before became 4 years. And at the end of this period, it was the Soviet Union that was triumphant, and it was Nazi Germany that was prostrate and was smashed. The German fascist state was destroyed, and it was destroyed not by the fake anti-fascists from the United States or Britain or from France. It was destroyed by the Soviet Union and its people, led by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Bolsheviks and its undisputed leader, Joseph Stalin. When at the end of the Second World War, Soviet troops paraded on the Victory Day in Red Square, they brought with them standards that they had captured from the German army and threw them at the feet of the mausoleum of V.I. Lenin. That was a dramatic demonstration of the strength of the working class. Those who will tell you, comrades, socialism is a failed system should cast their mind back to that Victory Day parade. That Victory Day parade was certainly understood by imperialism, which was shaken to its very foundation by the sight of Soviet victory. These achievements of the Soviet Union, and there are many others that I cannot in this brief message recount to you. There is not a field of human endeavor in which the Soviet Union did not make a significant contribution, be it the fight against opportunism, be it the fight against colonialism and imperialism, be it the fight for construction of socialism, be it the fight for the emancipation of the working class, be it the cultural development of the working class, be it the scientific development of Soviet science, be it in the field of diplomacy. In every single field, the Soviet Union excelled and defeated its enemies, and what's more, it defeated its greatest enemy, ignorance, backwardness, that characterized the Russian people before the October Revolution. All those gains have unfortunately been undone. How came about that these great victories of the Soviet Union were undone? They were not undone by the mortal enemies of the working class in the shape of imperialist and capitalist exploiters. They were undone by the enemies within the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, who, by departing from the principles of Marxism-Leninism, who, by denouncing the Marxist-Leninist leadership of Joseph Stalin, laid the foundations by degrees to bring about the restoration of capitalism. Even then, with the wrong policies, it took them 3.5 decades before the Soviet Union could be brought to its knees. And really, there is a lesson to be learned, which the working class movement needs to be learned, which my party has certainly taken to its heart, namely, that as Lenin constantly insisted, that the fight against imperialism and for socialism is a humbug and a sham unless it's accompanied by the fight against opportunism. We have to fight against opportunism in our movement. It was precisely because the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, had fought against opportunism in their own party for literally 2 decades that they were successful in making a revolution, whereas much larger parties like the German Social Democratic parties failed. And it was the treachery of people within our own parties, within our own movement, which has been responsible for our greatest losses. During the time of the First World War and following it, it was the Social Democratic parties that betrayed socialism. Had they not done so, the Soviet Union would not have been left single-handed to defend itself against imperialism. The shape of the world would have been completely different. And again, having come through this very difficult and complicated period and having scored great victories in the Second World War, the strength and the victories of the arms of the Red Army brought socialism to Eastern and Central Europe. There wasn't a single capital in Eastern and Central Europe where the red flag with its proud symbols of hammer and sickle did not flutter. It was everywhere. And it's that which has gone. During the period that the Soviet Union was following the principles of Marxism-Leninism in every single field, there was no battle they could not win. There was no fort they could not storm. And the Soviet Union, which had defeated the interventionist armies of hundreds of thousands, which had defeated millions of Nazi fascist hordes, actually collapsed without a single shot being fired because it was hollowed out from inside by the practice of revisionism. If we are to build a working class movement, it's very essential for us to actually learn this lesson and fight against opportunism. There are plenty of comrades in our movement who are soft on social democracy even today. Up comes every election, all they say is, vote Labour in our country, and probably the same in your countries. It's not that we are particularly hostile to labor and we are favorable to Tories or anything. Not at all. We just say that these parties are the betrayers of socialism. Never will they come to the side of working class. Ever since the First World War, they have been imperialists, they are imperialists, and they will continue to be imperialists. They have to be defeated by the building of a genuinely revolutionary Marxist-Leninist movement in every single country. We are a very small party, but we are proud that in our own way we fight against imperialism. We fight against organizations that claim to be fighting, for example, against war, but actually side with the Labour Party and indirectly side with imperialism. So we have a funny situation in our country where the war against the oppressed people is being waged by imperialism. The war of austerity and cuts in social spending is being waged by imperialism against the working class. And yet the anti-war movement is also in the hands of the agents of imperialism. And we continue to insist that the fight for peace is again a sham and a humbug unless it's accompanied by the fight against imperialism. The fight has to be against imperialism. And if our own bourgeoisie is waging war against oppressed people, we've got to be on the side of oppressed people against our own imperialist bourgeoisie. For putting forward this very obvious stance, we have been vilified. We've been vilified by people who call themselves socialists. Some even call themselves communists, call us sectarians. They can continue to their heart's content to condemn us, but will continue to point out the truths that without learning which the working class movement cannot advance. Although we are a small party, comrades, we have contributed tremendously to the development of Marxist-Leninist literature in various areas. Our party has produced a book, Perestroika, The Complete Collapse of Revisionism. It's a book many of you have seen and read. And those of you who haven't, I would suggest that you buy. Not because I make my living out of writing, because I do not. It is because we wish to share our experiences and our thoughts with you, and we want other people to be doing similar things. If you have criticism of any of our writings, please write to us. We're more than happy to actually accept any just criticisms, and if they're unjust, we're happy to refute them. Also, Lenin lived in the age of imperialism. Imperialism is the era of downfall of capitalism and the beginning of the emancipation of the working class and the liberation of the oppressed nations. And there is a lot to be learned from Lenin's writings on imperialism. I remember being invited 20 years ago by some German comrades. I was invited by some German comrades, and the topic I was given was, is Lenin's theory on imperialism still valid? I, in an unguarded moment, accepted the invitation. And then 6 weeks before the invitation was to materialize, I suddenly realized I could not go and simply regurgitate Lenin's thesis, because the whole point at issue was, is this thesis correct? So I had to quickly do some research to see if Lenin's thesis was valid, and my researches eventually led to a book, but I presented the thesis that not only was Lenin's thesis valid, but it was even more valid today than before, because all the development that has taken place in the intervening years has been in the direction pointed out by Lenin, and not in the opposite direction. So we'd like you to have a look at my book. It's been translated into several languages. It's been translated into German. It's been translated into the Czech language. It's been translated, if you're so minded, into Hindi. And parts of it have been translated in several other languages. I'd like you again to look at it, because it's very important that you know Lenin's thesis. It's really a weapon in the hands of the proletariat to fight against imperialism. And particularly, I'd like you, because we all live in imperialist countries here in this part of the world, to read Lenin's thesis on the question of the effect of imperialism on the working class movement and how it's productive of opportunism. Now, this is a thesis which many comrades do not accept. I've talked to a lot of American comrades and European comrades. They think it's almost a treachery against the working class to say that the working class could ever be corrupted by imperialism. But the fact of the matter is, imperialism corrupts the upper echelons of the bourgeoisie, of the working class. Unless it did, you would not be able to explain why German social democracy went bankrupt, why so many other parties went bankrupt, and how so many other parties continue to be bankrupt today. Finally, in the European movement at least, there is a form of opportunism which is quite prevalent, namely Trotskyism. Lenin fought against Trotskyism all his life, and after his death, this fight was taken over by Joseph Stalin. It was not a new fight. It was a continuation of the fight that Lenin had waged against Trotsky, and Trotsky had waged against Leninism. And Trotsky was then to pretend that it was a fight against Stalinism. All the accusations that he made against Stalin were exactly the same that he'd made against Lenin earlier on. It was a continuation of the same fight. And to expose Trotskyism, we have produced a book, Trotskyism or Leninism, which again has been translated into some European languages. It's been translated into French. It's been translated into Portuguese. And I'd like you to get hold of these copies, because we're saying nothing new that was not known to well-informed comrades in the 30s and 40s. But since then, this material has become unavailable, and we're reviving that material so that comrades can have knowledge of what Trotskyism is really about. Trotskyism is not as Stalin said, at one time, Trotskyism was a trend, albeit an erroneous trend in the working class movement. But since 1927-28, Trotskyism has become a counter-revolutionary agency serving the intelligence services of imperialist countries. That's precisely what Trotskyism did, and that's what the Trotskyite organizations continue to do up to today. Everywhere they fight against national liberation, and they fight against proletarian revolution and support imperialism, no matter how revolutionary their rhetorical language, but in practice they are counter-revolutionary. And I'd like you to have a look at our literature and get in touch with us. I thank you for your invitation, and we wish you success in building in your respective countries proper Marxist-Leninist parties which would take up the cudgel of fighting against imperialism, overthrowing imperialism, and accomplishing the historical mission of the proletariat, namely getting rid of all exploitation and bringing socialism, the liberation of the working class, and the liberation of humanity at large. I conclude by saying, glory to the great October Socialist Revolution. May it continue to guide people everywhere who are struggling for the emancipation of the proletariat and the liberation of the oppressed nations.